Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Watch Club. It's the March edition. I am Program Director James Sullivan with the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival here in Massachusetts, home of the New England Patriots. And we are very excited today to welcome the director of the 10-part Apple TV series, The Dynasty, New England Patriots. I'm very eager to talk to director Matthew Hamachek. For those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to see the whole series, or maybe watched it a while ago, well, you haven't watched it a while ago because it's still rolling out, but maybe watch the first couple of episodes. We want to show you the trailer briefly so that we can bring you up to speed, and then we'll welcome Matthew into the studio.
This team will be scrutinized, celebrated for as long as the game is played.
In pro football, nobody's entitled to anything. You have to go out there and earn it.
I was pretty intent on proving myself.
We were going to determine the future of football in New England.
The Patriots are Super Bowl champions! First dynasty of the century.
This game is like a narcotic. You're chasing that forever.
Breaking news right now.
Spygate. Deflategate.
Aaron couldn't separate himself from that dark side.
That team won enough to become the villain.
We worked for Bill, but we played for Tom.
Bill tore Brady's head completely off.
There's things that are done that can't be undone.
I was just trying to hold it together the best I could.
This team will be scrutinized, celebrated for as long as the game of football is played.
Matthew Hamachek, welcome to the Watch Club.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Looking forward to talking to you. So I think I want to begin by just mentioning something to you to see your response. In watching your series, I feel like I mean, of course it's about football. Of course it's about the Patriots, but I feel like I'm watching an opera.
I appreciate that. I think, well, we go there, especially in episode 4, when the Patriots are going up against the Giants in the, in the Super Bowl. But, I think that when I started to dive into this story, the thing that, as a non-Patriot fan growing up, I followed another team and didn't really follow the Patriots all that much, which was, I think, in a way really beneficial because I didn't, have some preconceived notion of over what games or what anything should be really covered here. And I got to sit there and be like, well, these are the guys that are there. So I'm just going to sit back and listen and hear what they have to say. But at its core, I found this like deeply human story. And, I've called it sort of Shakespeare, but with footballs. But I think opera, but with footballs is sort of an equally right way of sort of looking at it. I think that if you hate football or if you love it, or if you love the Patriots or you hate them or anything in between, I think this is a story that goes way beyond all of that and just is about people and sort of, I'll never forget, I was interviewing the director of football research, this guy, Ernie Adams, if anybody follows anything about the Patriots, they know Ernie Adams is sort of this mystery figure that nobody knows anything about.
They know that they're never going to get anything more out of Ernie Adams than you did.
Yeah. So I was sitting there across from Ernie Adams, and I remember him saying, every team in the league every year says that they want to win a Super Bowl, but not every team is willing to do what it takes to get there. And when he said that to me, I think that was like an aha moment of, okay, I think that's what we're going to be trying to figure out here. What does it take to obtain greatness? And I think that can be looked at as in a lot of ways, but there's also there's beauty in that, and there's darkness in that, and there's everything in between. And I think that's what intrigued and sort of drew me into the story and made it an interesting story to tell that went way beyond football.
So obviously, let's talk nuts and bolts for a second. Obviously, you weren't there 20 years ago to start shooting some of that secret footage in the locker room talk and all that kind of stuff, which makes the series so special. But part of the reason. But this is kind of a two-part question. Was that part of the NFL Films program, or where did those, where does that footage come from? All that behind the scenes stuff. And the second question I want you to address, which I'm sure you do all the time, is Jeff Benedict's book, right? Which which gave the series its title, and somebody decided as soon as that book was published, we should just make this into a series, right?
Yeah, and that was really Apple. I mean, Jeff took the book out and was sort of shopping it around, and at the time, I was, just wrapping a 2-part documentary series for HBO called Tiger, about the golfer Tiger Woods.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff had also written the book that had inspired that documentary, and he was out shopping this around, and then Apple came on board, and Jeff and I had talked for a while I was making Tiger, and at the end of it, he just sort of said, would you be interested in coming on and doing this thing? And I said, of course. And to give you a visual idea of the extent of the footage, it would have taken 2 Mack trucks filled up with tapes about the size of a credit card, a little bit thicker, obviously, but more or less the size of a credit card. 2 Mack trucks filled completely with tapes to give you a sense of how much footage we had to go through.
You're not really exaggerating, are you?
No, not at all. It's
wow.
35,000 hours.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And so just having people begin to go through that and look for things and skip over a lot of stuff that, was obviously not going to be usable. But then all of a sudden, we would find these moments like, in every year, the NFL has something called the Rookie Symposium. If you're drafted onto a team, you get to go there, and to the league's credit, they actually give the players sort of warning signs of, look, your life's about to change. You're going to be given money. You're going to be also given all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think that that's going to change you for the good, you're wrong. And here's the pitfalls that you need to look out for. And so we found this footage, and it happened to be Chris Carter, who's a Hall of Fame wide receiver. And he was talking to the rookies in the 2010 draft class. And all of a sudden, Aaron Hernandez raises his hand and says, he starts asking questions. And, when you see something like that, there's the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, I don't know how much, how much it's worth for 24 frames a second for a minute long scene, but it was just breathtaking to be able to see. And those kind of moments paired with being able to talk to the guys that were actually in the room for all of this stuff.
Yeah.
The thing with the Patriots is even if you know nothing about them, you at least know that they were always at arm's length, right? You were never sort of invited into the party if there ever was one. And so you get access to that kind of footage, plus the people that were there. And I think a lot of times our job was to get out of the way and let them talk and let the footage talk and just sit back and let it play out.
Right. I take a brief moment to say that those of you who are watching live, if you want to ask Matthew a question, you are welcome to type a question in the chat. And if I haven't already asked it, we will post it here in the scroll that Steve, our producer, is showing you. So Matthew, do you want to talk to me a little bit about your history in documentary filmmaking and how that applies to there's several scenes where you have all of these figures, from the last 20 years of the Patriots history sitting on camera, and you're clearly behind the camera. And sometimes we can hear you asking the questions or, framing the questions. I'm a journalist. It's not easy to sit someone down and then say, listen, we have to address all the tough, we're not just going to talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah.
We have to address the difficult things too. What about your history in filmmaking and working with others before you became a director yourself helped you? You seem to have quite a bit of poise in terms of posing those unbelievably hard questions that someone like, I don't know, maybe Bill Belichick doesn't feel like answering, right?
Yeah. I was really lucky because for 20 years before I started directing, give or take, I was working as an editor. And for, people who don't, work in documentary film, the way that documentaries normally work is somebody goes out into the field and they ask questions, or they shoot verite sort of fly on the wall footage, and then they bring it back. And in varying degrees. The director either sort of gives it to the editor and walks away, or they're very, very involved. But either way, I had a 20-year crash course in, how to put together stories by helping other people put their stories together. And the other luxury of being able to edit for that long is that you get to listen when you start to go through all the raw footage of these interviews. You get to listen to all these directors asking all of these questions and how they do it and what their techniques are and things like that. And so, I've worked on films where directors have gone into war zones and, and been in much more precarious situations than having to ask Bill Belichick questions. I can assure you. So the way I looked at, interviewing Bill in particular was I felt as a person who was, trying to get to the bottom of this question of what does it take to obtain greatness, that, we got to talk about, episode 5, episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So basically the first 5 episodes of the series are really, in a lot of ways, a love letter to Bill Belichick and his coaching and the culture that he creates and his ability to see something that nobody else in the history of the NFL has seen. And, in finding a quarterback like Tom Brady, when everybody was trying to tell him, no, like, you've got to go stick with this guy, Drew Bledsoe, has a $100 million contract and all this stuff. But you also, when you talk to somebody like that, you also have to realize, like, he also needs to be asked about things like Spygate, about Deflategate, about Aaron Hernandez, and about why this whole thing fell apart. And so it's part that he has to answer, be asked all the questions that everybody else is asked, but it's also that other people are saying things about him, and I want to give him the opportunity to comment on those things. And I didn't think, honestly, that I was going to get more than one interview with him. And, it was 3 hours long, spread over 2 days, but I wanted to make sure I got every question in. And so, I just sort of thought of it like, in a very bizarre way, it was almost like every other interview that I was doing for the project.
You said that he, it's not like, filming in a war zone, but brings me to, one of the many great quotes from all of your interview subjects. I think it's Dante Stallworth who says, Belichick is, everybody else is coaching football and he's coaching for warfare. Right.
Yeah.
Which is, that's just kind of sums it all up. Right.
Well, and I think it was important to, there's lots of different ways you can sort of shape a character in the edit, especially when you're telling a documentary. And the best characters to me are those that are 3-dimensional. So if somebody comes in and they're just gruff and they're, as Randy Moss says, decapitating their players in film sessions and things like that, then I don't think it's really worth even telling the story if that's all you're showing. But when you understand where a person came from, why they look at the world a certain way, and then you also understand that there's a reason behind the way that they do things, and they're trying to establish a culture, and what they're trying to do is something that's very, very rare in any facet of our society, which is to create an environment in which there's no stars. Everybody checks their ego at the door, and everybody buys in and says, we're all just here to do this one thing, which is, in this case, it happens to be win Super Bowls. But anybody who's even worked on a group project in school knows how hard it is to create that kind of environment, much less on the biggest stage with a multi-billion-dollar industry with media and scrutiny. 91 of the top 100 television events last year were NFL football games.
Right.
So, Bill is a very, very interesting person, but a tremendous amount of the success of that team is owed to the culture that he created. And, sometimes I have people who say, well, why didn't Bill just change? Why didn't he stop doing what he did? And my answer is always, he had a singular goal, and the culture that he created and the way that he was kept getting them back to that goal and accomplishing it over and over and over again. And, people say, well, why didn't he change it in the last couple of years? And maybe Tom would have stayed longer and all this kind of stuff. And I just say, well, but maybe they wouldn't have won the Super Bowl against the Rams at the end, or, maybe this wouldn't have happened, or maybe that wouldn't have happened. So I always think that nuance and complexity makes for the best kind of storytelling, and nuanced and complex characters are make for the best kind of characters. And so that, I think we were really fortunate to be able to do that with everybody that we sort of studied on in this journey to find out what does it take to accomplish greatness.
So obviously you got all of the major players on board, Kraft and Brady and, all kinds of the superstars who played for the team over the years. Moss is a great example. He's such a lively presence on camera, right? But I'm sure this is the thing that every Patriots fan asks you or wants to ask you. Can you give us a little insight into the process? We started talking about this before we came on camera, but you had the power of Apple TV behind you, and probably the NFL for all I know. But what was the sort of domino effect? Okay, finally Tom said yes, so now we're going to have all the players or whatever. Was there that, and was there sort of a, biting your knuckles like, oh my God, I don't know if whoever, Scott Pioli or somebody is going to say yes, and we really want to talk to him, or Ernie Adams for that matter, right?
No, absolutely. The thing is, I think one of the things I've learned in watching other people, direct projects, and the thing that I've learned in the two sort of series that I've now directed, which, in total have taken 5 years to direct, a lot of it is just sort of accepting the uncertainty of making a project, right? You can't sit around too much and say, well, what if we don't get this, or what if we don't get that? And you're right. There was definitely a domino effect. I mean, Ernie Adams came on very early, and it was interesting. I'd say as much as Apple TV's backing, I would say every time I went to a player and I said, Ernie Adams is sitting, and Ernie Adams is giving me 15 hours of interviews, or whatever the amount of time was at the time that I would call people, that kind of a thing would have an effect on people because they knew that Ernie Adams was the guy that never talked. And so that helps me out a lot. I think, once Tom was in and once Bill was in, then definitely any of the people who were still thinking about, whether they would participate or not, they would sort of come along. And sometimes I would go to people, and I've done this on both projects, and I would just sort of say to people like, hey, I would say this, Adam Vinatieri was a good example of this. He had the kick in the snow game and all the Super Bowls, and it was obviously a very important part of this. And he really wanted to make sure that it was going to be the unvarnished telling of the story, but also that the three main pillars would be involved and other people would be involved. But I said this to Adam, and I've said this to other people. I sort of, sometimes I go to people and I just say, look, you're going to be a character in this thing one way or another, right? I have, interviews that you've done in archive, or I've had, the footage of you in the games or whatever. But I really want you to tell it in your voice rather than having me be the one who dictates what you say from some interview that you did, however many years ago. I want you to be there live and be able to explain to people, and I can ask questions that other people have sort of asked about one of their fellow teammates and everything. And so, it's always a long journey, but you just sort of have to have this faith that it's all going to work out in the end. And then when it doesn't, the best part about it is that when you don't have something that you want, or you don't have an interview that you really want, or you're missing some footage, that makes you more creative. And I remember back to Amanda Knox, something I did for Netflix as a writer and editor and producer. We only had 5 characters or so for that entire project. And that left a lot of room to, where we wouldn't be inside the prison cell with Amanda or something like that. And I remember when we were putting that together, I was editing at the time, and I started to just cut out to the faces of the people while they were in the interview chair. And sometimes it was more powerful to just look into somebody's eyes than it was to sort of go into a prison someplace, whether it was the actual cell that Amanda was in or otherwise. In film, it was just more interesting to just look at a person. So there's sort of this, there's a confidence in a way that everything's going to work out one way or the other. And if you're either going to get the thing that you want, or the person that you want to sit down in the chair, or if you don't, it'll make the thing better because you'll figure out some way to tell the story.
But that's not how a lot of people operate. People don't have the same kind of confidence. I mean, you have that, you clearly have that confidence. You feel good about it. It'll work out. But, a lot of people would stress out about that, right?
Yeah, I think so. But you know, I also really make a point of, I'm very lucky to surround myself with people who are extremely talented, and you have faith in your crew and you have faith in your team, and
Yep.
you know that. I don't know how to describe it. It's just a piece at sort of the chaos of it all, but I think it's important to have that, because and that doesn't mean that you stop worrying about things and you stop trying. It just means, you know, you sort of accept what's happening and you focus on the things that you can control.
How much did your work on the Tiger doc affect, like, I'm sure that some of the players said, "Oh, I watched that. That was great," you know, but you probably also heard, or maybe behind the scenes might have heard secondhand that, you know, a few of them were like, "Wow, he kind of told the whole story," and you know, that, like, you know, it's all laid out there, you know, warts and all, right?
Yeah, but that's important. I think that's an important thing. I think a lot of the questions that you get from people are things like, how am I going to be portrayed? And when I say is that it's going to be somewhere between the hit piece and the puff piece. And you know, that I think for all of us in our lives, you know, that's kind of where the truth lies, right? We're neither the, you know, the version that we would make about ourselves, and we're not the version that our enemy would make about us, right? And so I think you have to be upfront with people and say, we're going to ask tough questions and we're going to go to places that you probably haven't been asked about before. But it's important because, especially with a story like this that's been covered so many times. I mean, you think about the NFL films and what the Patriots have released and all sorts of things like that, where, you know, there's you know, hundreds of hours of content out there about the Patriots. And so I think for me, as a person who didn't grow up loving the Patriots, I didn't dislike them. I just wasn't a fan. I wouldn't have the appetite for more of the hagiography of the Patriots. I wanted something that would go into the places and go beyond sort of the football.
Right. One person, like, you know, we could talk for hours about each of the people who you spoke with, each of the former players and, you know, coaches and front office people. But one person I think who really deserves a shout out maybe is Bledsoe, who just comes across as such an incredible stand-up guy in terms of, you know, how wrong it felt to him that, you know, this kid Tommy, he took his job after he got injured, and but then he sticks it out, you know, and stands by Brady and supports him, and you know, he just comes across as a really stand-up guy.
He comes across that way because that's who he is. Try to imagine one of the darkest periods of your life, and the main reason you get interview requests over the course of the last 20 plus years is basically because people want to talk to you about that period of your life, right? And you know, the year before the sort of the off season before Tom got his start, Drew had $100 million contract, which is, you know, for football fans out there, it's like, you know, it's the Patrick Mahomes contract. It's as good as it gets, right? He was the face of the franchise, and I know I'm speaking to your crowd in New England who doesn't need to hear all this stuff. They know, but you know, I'll never forget. So I had interviewed Drew. I had talked to his wife, who was wonderful as well, and they went into all of it. And you know, there were times where it was dark, and Drew talked about going to his wife and just saying, maybe we should just leave. Maybe we should just get out of here and never come back. And, you know, all these things. But then I was talking to Teddy Bruschi and Adam Vinatieri and different people talked about Drew and the sacrifice that he made for the team at that point in time. And I'll never forget when Teddy Bruschi said, you know, here's $100 million quarterback doing what's best for the team. And he says, that's when I think the Patriot way really started. And I remember just getting chills when he said that, because it was, I think it was true. And I don't think enough people give Drew credit for that. And, and it was great to hear somebody like Teddy, who's sort of, you know, Mr. Patriot, saying that, when a lot of people would probably put that on Bill or Tom or somebody else, or even Teddy.
Well, I mean, so if Bledsoe hasn't gotten enough credit for that, he certainly gets it in your series, which is why I brought it up.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty clear. So hopefully he feels good about it anyway. I just have one or two more questions for you, but I want to say I'm kind of shocked that none of you Patriots fans out there are throwing Matthew a question. This is your last chance. So type it in if you want to. But one thing that struck me, Matthew, was that I didn't know until I guess I watched the first episode and saw the credits that Brian Glazer and Ron Howard are part of the producing team, right? How did that come about, and what's their interest? I mean, it's good storytelling, right? And that's what they do.
Tell me about it.
But yeah, tell me if you can about their involvement.
Yeah. So, when you make a documentary or a movie, basically there's two key entities that come on board from up on high. And the first one is the studio or the network or the streamer. That was Apple TV. And then the production company, and that was Imagine Entertainment and Imagine Documentaries.
Right.
And, it's one of those things where we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but, I went to film school and was very, very lucky to have two incredible teachers that really taught me so much about how to make films. But I think as much as that, I really learned a lot from just watching films that I loved over and over and over again. And they weren't always, the most highfalutin movies imaginable. Like I love, we were talking about Lawrence of Arabia, and I've probably watched that 30 times, give or take, more than that maybe. But I've also probably watched Backdraft, which Ron Howard and Brian Glazer made, and fell in love with movies like that, like Apollo 13 and all the different things that they've produced over the years. And so honestly, just to get to partner with them and occasionally get a note or two from them and things like that was just, really, really fortunate. But they're also people that have been in the trenches and still are in the trenches making movies. And so to have the backing of people like that who say, no, let's do this. Let's spend the money on this. Let's do whatever. And it was great to have their support.
And they make obviously well-told feature stories, but they also make documentaries, well-told documentaries.
That's
so
right.
So you didn't watch Backdraft 30 times because they produced your movie. You had already
no. I've watched Backdraft and Apollo. Apollo 13 is one of the all-time greats, and just learning how to build tension and things like that. I mean, they're obviously masters, but so it's just great to even hop on Zooms with them every once in a while and talk about stuff. So
I bet.
Really lucky.
I'm going to give the last question to one of our viewers, Patriots super fan Michelle, who asks, "How was Tom to work with?"
Okay, so I would say he was. There's people will say sometimes you don't ever want to meet your heroes, and Tom wasn't one of my heroes. But for Michelle, as a super fan, I can say that you can, if you ever get the opportunity to meet Tom Brady, go meet Tom Brady, because he will live up to every expectation you have and then some. I think I was convinced at the time that Tom was going to show up and he'd have hair and makeup and PR minders who would sort of sit behind me and tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, you can't ask him about the date, and all these sorts of things. And to his credit, he drives up in his car by himself, parks, gets out, sits down in the chair, no hair, no makeup, and just says, what do you guys want to talk about? And we were like, okay, well, we got to get the cameras adjusted and then lighting, and he just sat there patiently. And then I said, you ready to roll? And in true Tom Brady fashion, he just said, let's go. And that was it.
Well, but so one of the first things I wrote down when I was taking notes during watching the series is he says in the first episode, right? He's talking about the whole story, and he says, I'm not going to allow people to take away something so special, right?
Yeah.
He says it's perfect.
It doesn't need to be more than that.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. I was thinking about this a lot because I was up in Boston and I was screening in episode 10 up there recently, and I hadn't watched it since. It's been a while since we've wrapped on the series, and episode 10 is coming out this Friday. It's obviously the final episode. Right.
And I've been thinking about that line, the idea of it's perfect, it doesn't need to be more than that. And I'm not sure, I don't want to put words in Tom's mouth, but what it means to me is that the story is complicated, right? And the people within it are complicated. And unfortunately, this thing comes to an end And, it gets messy towards the end. But at the same time, the fact that it lasted as long as it did is just as special, if not more special, than the fact that it ended the way that it did. And so when he says it's perfect, it doesn't need to be anything more than that. I sort of think of him, when I hear that line, I see it as, it's the mess, it's the good, it's the bad, it's the Lombardi trophies, it's everything in between, and it's perfect. It doesn't need to be more than that.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't mean we were perfect. He means I recognize this story as a perfect story.
Yeah, and I think that that's what's so great about it. When we were making this thing, we always really tried to tell the story as if you were in the room at every single moment, not the sort of 30,000 foot, time has gone by and I'm reflecting back on all this stuff now, but more, what was it like to be there when everything was going on, when success was happening, when tough things were happening.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, Tom repeats that line towards the end of the series in episode 10. And I think in a way it's this one moment, episode 10, there's a couple moments actually where we finally let the reflection in. And we let people talk about how they feel about this and how much it meant to them. And the interesting thing is, obviously part of this story is that Tom and Bill, their relationship falls apart a little bit at the end and everything. But I think if viewers look, they'll notice that of the couple times that Tom gets choked up and starts crying in the series, it's when he mentions Bill and his family at the end that he really starts to get choked up. And so that's what I mean when I try to interpret it's perfect, it doesn't need to be anything more than that. It's obviously an incredible story, and I think whether you call it an opera, whether you call it Shakespeare or anything in between, it's a really, really special story. And I hope that folks in New England can look at the series and can look at what they got to witness for 20 years and just sort of feel very lucky, because I think this was a story that transcended football, transcended sports. And, I just feel lucky that I got to sit across from all these people and learn about what it takes to get there and all these great lessons. So I consider myself very lucky.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. Can't recommend it enough. For those of you who have been watching, the last 2 episodes do drop this Friday on Apple TV. And, for those of you who have been watching, tell your friends this interview will be archived in the Watch Club, and everybody should watch it because Matthew, you're a great guest. And again, I can't recommend your series enough. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors, and we'll see you next month in the Watch Club. Thanks again, Matthew.
Thank you.